Hello, my name is Zhi, and today on behalf of my colleagues Erilyn and Kinghua, I will be presenting our work titled To Congregate or to Disperse, Structural Analysis for Data-like Identification of Social Interaction in Public Spaces. At the time of writing this paper, I was a research engineer at the Electricity de France Lab, Singapore, and Erilyn Tan was a senior research assistant at the Social Urban Research Group, SEARCH, at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Dr. Chong Kinghua is an associate professor in the Architecture and Sustainable Design pillar and the director of SEARCH at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. I will explain the motivation, methodology, and validation of a study to identify public spaces that play host to social interaction. In short, our methodology involves a structural analysis applied to the residential town of Toa Payoh in Singapore to distinguish public spaces that play host to social interaction. In light of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic, this analysis can also be applied efficiently to identify public spaces that encourage social interaction and the contextual factors that draw crowd, thereby assisting urban planners and policymakers to develop solutions that disperse large crowds and encourage social distancing behavior among urban residents. As of 2018, over half of the world's population resides in urban areas. For urban residents, public spaces provide space for social interaction and activities. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals have been advised by the CDC to avoid large gatherings. Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority has introduced crowd monitoring and diversion measures to reduce crowding at public spaces. The whole of government has also deployed safe distancing ambassadors to physically patrol and verbally remind Singaporeans to practice safe distancing at public spaces. Which public spaces become venues for social interaction? In this work, we answer this question by distinguishing public spaces that are more attractive to individuals for social interaction and more prone to crowding. By identifying public spaces with social interaction, we can better ensure COVID-19 safe distancing management and social distancing. Our goal is to use a data-like method to identify public spaces in a residential estate with high potential for social interaction. We focus on a residential estate because while crowd levels at commercial spaces are manually monitored by their operators, non-commercial spaces such as that in a residential estate are not, and are too numerous to station staff at to monitor continuously. Young children and elderly may not carry mobile phones, making it difficult to use mobile phone data to identify social interaction. The use of a data-like method overcomes the difficulty in accounting for residents that do not carry mobile phones. By using a data-like method to identify public spaces in a residential estate with high potential for social interaction, we can reduce potential crowding as resources for safe distancing management can be effectively distributed among these public spaces to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Furthermore, design changes can be made to public spaces to disperse crowds to adjacent spaces. Public spaces in this study refer to precinct facilities provided in Singapore's public housing developments, catering to the social and recreational needs of the immediate urban residents. There are 6 categories of public spaces. The first are social amenities that provide services for residents. These public spaces include healthcare, childcare, and elder care. Secondly, sports and recreational facilities, which are usually playgrounds, fitness corners, or even community gardens. Third, precinct and community facilities are mainly unprogrammed spaces like amphitheaters and pavilions where residents gather for events or activities. Fourth, commercial amenities, which include shops and coffee shops. Fifth, programmed void deck spaces with inbuilt furniture provided and arranged to form specific spaces like study corners or parklets. Lastly, community initiatives, which include initiatives by residents who reactively or creatively utilize public spaces, like decorating and furnishing public spaces and porches outside units. 4 types of social interaction in precinct facilities are of interest, categorized based on how urban residents use and interact with them. These categories include passive, active, reactive, and creative. Passive usage of precinct facilities refers to when urban residents spontaneously make use of facilities for their intended purpose. They transform neither use, space, nor meaning. For example, children playing together at a playground and using the playground facilities according to their original function. Social interaction of observational interest involved urban residents at the facility that interacted spontaneously through conversation or participation in the same activity. The social interaction that took place was a product of the precinct facility. Active usage refers to using precinct facilities for planned activities like chess games or exercise classes. They are consistent in nature and of a larger scale as compared to passive usage. Participants in active usage make separate, independent decisions to arrive at a specific precinct facility for a planned activity. They interact due to common interests within the precinct facility and usually take on a sense of familiarity due to the regularity of these activities. Reactive usage refers to when a resident modifies the physical characteristics of a space as needs change, but must choose from a narrow and predictable range of configurations largely defined by the architect. Such additions become pseudo-permanent and are added reactionarily to insufficient infrastructure at precinct facilities. Most of the added furniture we observed were chairs to create more seating space for residents to converse in comfort. This temporal or semi-permanent modification of precinct facilities also allowed social interaction to be identified even when precinct facilities were unused during observation. Creative users either create a new space or give an existing one new meanings and uses. In context of Singapore's public housing, these usually involve the appropriation of unused or underutilized white spaces, usually initiated by an individual or a group of like-minded residents who share a common desire to inject a sense of identity and a new point of interest in their neighborhood. For example, residents were observed to appropriate spaces along empty green buffers outside ground floor housing units with pop-up gardens and outdoor furniture. Social interaction occurs when neighbors visit these spaces, whether out of curiosity, by coincidence, upon invitation, or self-invited. Mutual trust is required between the residents for its success due to the risk of vandalism and theft. On to methodology. Locations for public spaces were either found online from Singapore's public database at data.gov.sg or through field observations from the residential town of Toa Payoh. The site was then divided into a verification site and a validation site. The smaller verification site would be used to build and tune the model to identify locations for social interaction. The model would then be applied to the larger validation site. The figure on your right shows the boundaries of the Toa Payoh verification and validation sites on your left and right respectively. The black dots represent the distribution of precinct facilities in Toa Payoh. 697 precinct facilities were identified, comprising 219 in the verification site and 468 in the validation site. A simple undirected spatial network was created using each precinct facility as a node. The geographic location of all nodes were identified and the straight line distance between them calculated. Edges in the spatial network were weighted such that the spatial interaction between two nodes is inversely related to the square of their distance apart. Degree centrality within a network refers to the number of links or edges incident upon a node. The maximum possible degree of a node within our network is n-1, where n is the number of nodes in the simple graph. For a weighted network, the degree centrality is calculated considering the weights of adjacent edges. The degree centrality of each node can hence be simplified to an aggregation of weights for edges adjacent to each node. It is the sum of weights of edges between the node of interest and all other nodes in the network. For a weighted network, the degree centrality of a node is calculated by aggregating weights of all its edges following the formula given, where C subscript D superscript W of I is the weighted degree centrality of node I, and W is the weight of the edge connecting nodes I and J. Nodes of high social interaction potential were found by calculating the local degree centrality maxima in the network and comparing the degree centrality of a selected node with other nodes in a search radius around it. If there were no other nodes within the search radius, the node was deemed invalid. Within the verification site, it was found that a search radius of 100 meters was ideal. The 100-meter search radius was fine enough to identify local peaks in degree centrality within the network, yet large enough such that a sufficient number of public spaces would be captured in the search radius. The results were consistent and stable when the search radius varied between 85 and 115 meters. 20 nodes were identified in the verification site, and 8 corresponded to commercial or social amenities that are programmed and already utilized. As these are programmed spaces with a pre-specified purpose, they lack space for social interaction and were replaced with the closest distance non-programmed space. Using this replacement methodology, 20 nodes representing non-programmed precinct facilities were identified for potential social interaction in the verification site. This same methodology was applied to the validation site. Combining the verification and validation sites, 57 nodes of high potential for social interaction were identified. The figure on your right gives a breakdown of their types. The 3 most common types of precinct facilities were void decks, residence committees, and sheltered pavilions. We found through a post-analysis visit to the verification site that 17 out of the 20 identified nodes hosted social interaction at the precinct facility itself or directly adjacent to it. As mentioned, a network was also built within the validation site. This network comprised 468 precinct facilities. Likewise, nodes of high degree centrality were found using a 100-meter search radius, then filtered to replace programmed spaces. Here we found 37 nodes of high potential for social interaction, and 33 out of the 37 identified nodes hosted social interaction at the public space itself or directly adjacent to it. We now discuss our results. The most common type of precinct facility identified were void decks. Void decks refer to the ground floor of public housing, a design decision of the Housing Development Board to construct public housing on pillars and free up ground-level open sheltered spaces. 23 out of the 24 void decks identified had a high degree centrality because they shared space with one or more of other programmed spaces such as childcare centers, residence committees, welfare services, elder care services, study corners, or supermarkets. During field observations, 20 of the 24 identified void decks were found host to social interaction. As the void decks were identified due to their close proximity to programmed spaces, all the void decks were passively used for conversation among individuals, such as in the top 2 figures. These individuals were either making use of programmed spaces in the void deck, waiting for the programmed spaces to open, or passing through the void deck to reach other public spaces. The third figure shows elderly playing chess at the void deck, using provided chess tables. When seating spaces were insufficient for social interaction, the void deck was found to be reactively used with personal chairs to provide additional seating spaces. In some cases, void decks were close to other public spaces but lacked sufficient space for activities, resulting in residents utilizing public spaces adjacent to the void decks, as in the last bottommost figure. 6 out of 20 residence committees in Toa Payoh were found to have a high social interaction potential. All 6 hosted social interaction. 5 shared a void deck space with other programmed spaces, and 3 were adjacent to a playground or fitness corner, as seen in the top 2 figures. Another 7 residence committees in Toa Payoh were near other points of high potential for social interaction. Residence committees foster harmonious inter-ethnic relationships through their activities and encourage interaction by providing seating spaces for passive usage and spontaneous conversation near these facilities. The placement of RCs may hence have been to build on existing social interaction within public spaces and encourage interaction by providing seating spaces for passive usage and spontaneous conversation near these facilities. Residence communities close to clusters of non-programmed spaces have high degree centrality and can attract urban residents to attend organized events, such as in the third figure. They encourage active usage of public spaces and social interaction among residents. 5 sheltered pavilions were identified to have high social interaction potential. All hosted social interaction due to their proximity to other programmed spaces, playgrounds, and fitness corners, such as in the bottommost figure, where adults make active use of a sheltered pavilion for a yoga session. The proposed structural analysis is a data-like methodology for identifying social interaction in precinct facilities. Of the 57 nodes recommended by the analysis, 50 were found to host social interaction through field observations. This analysis has hence been implemented as a technological feature in the CAVI digital platform for use by urban planners and policymakers as a data-like method to understand how planning or placement of public spaces can impact the development of social dynamics and relations. For future work, the methodology may be improved to consider both degree centrality and precinct facility type to identify the social interaction or usage of the precinct facility. We conclude this presentation with some recommendations for safe distancing. Firstly, resources for safe distancing can be distributed to these identified public spaces with high potential for social interaction. Secondly, field observations suggest attractors to adjacent public spaces include seating and shade. The installation of seats at adjacent sheltered areas will encourage passive usage of these spaces, naturally dispersing crowds at public spaces with high potential for social interaction and encouraging social distancing. This research is in collaboration with the Singapore Housing and Development Board, HDB, supported by the Ministry of National Development under the New Urban Kampong Research Programme. Thank you for your attention.